Welcome to day 2 of the Embrace Sports Bra Sew Along. I'm so glad that you're back. Today we get to start sewing. Today's today's task is to sew the front pieces, the lining to the main at the Armscye, and also to sew the back, the main and the lining at the Armscye. So it sounds complicated, but that's all you have today. Today's gonna be one of the longer days, depending on what options you pick. If you're just doing a solid front with a solid back, then it'll be a quick day for you. But if you've picked all the options, today might be one of the longer days for you. Okay, so let's get started. Let's do darts. So if you are doing the darted version, then you need to first trace your dart onto your main and on your lining on both sides. So when I was cutting it out, I went ahead and cut it and traced onto that side, but now I got to flip it over and trace my dart onto the other side so that I have one for both breasts. And I like to use a marker. You can use, there's tracing wheels you can use, there's chalk. I just use one that dissolves in water, and then I mark it like that. Now I'm going to do my lining. Now on this particular bra, I'm doing the solid front option, but it works the same if you're doing the one that's color blocked, that's pieced in the front. Then you're just going to get this part with the dart and mark that on your fabric. Okay, so now I have both my main and my lining marked. Okay, when you are marking your darts, you just want to make sure that you have marked them on the wrong side of your fabric, because when we sew them, we're going to be putting it right sides together, and you'll want to be able to see where you have marked to be able to sew. So if it's on the right side, once it's folded in half, your right side is going to be covered up and you're not going to know exactly where you're sewing. So now I'm going to go ahead and just grab, you can grab a clip or a pin, whatever is easier. You can just pinch it together with your hands and fold these right sides together. And we're going to go to the sewing machine, and I like to start on the end of the triangle for the dart. So I'll start sewing here, and then I'll just sew all the way down until I get here. And I'm going to do that on all 4 of them. Okay, I'm at the sewing machine and my dart is marked on the wrong side, so I am putting the right sides together. This is a smaller dart and you're dealing with stretch fabric, so I don't really pay attention. I do pay attention, but I don't pay attention to like heavily clipping, and I don't make sure that I've put tons of pins in it because it's just such a small dart. One thing that I'm going to do is I use my sewing machine a lot for sewing wovens. So I'm going to change out my needle. First, I'm going to put a knit needle. This is a stretch needle in because, so if you need to get a new needle, get a new needle. One that is either ballpoint or for sewing stretch fabrics. Make sure that your thread somewhat matches. So I'll pinch at the top right where the end of the triangle was or is. And then I'm going to match my bottoms. I use a stretch stitch. You do not want to use a zigzag. You want to use a stitch that sews straight. You want to stretch your fabric. You just want to let the machine move the fabric through. And there is your dart. That's what it looks like on the other side. And you can go through and iron that. One thing to think about whenever you're doing the dart is that you take a gradual seam as you move outwards, because the sharper that it is, the sharper that you move out, the more you're gonna get that little puckering there. But the more you ease into it, the less of a pucker you'll have at the top. Let me see if I did a little bit better on this one. I think I did a little better on that one. See the way that is? So I went a little bit, I slowly moved out there. So it was just very gradual. Well, this one, I think I did a little sharper. So anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and do the other one. My main and my lining are the same. So it doesn't matter which. I think the one that you like the best is the one that should be your main. if your darts look better on one piece than they do the other. We are doing the color blocked front option on the bra. So in order to do the color blocked option, and that's the one where you're going to have a different color for the top and the bottom of the front. You could do the same color if you just wanted to do some stitching and have that pieced, but it's if you're just going to do the same color, you might as well do the flat front option that has just the front line, 2 of the front liner pieces. Okay, so in order to do the color blocking, you are going to cut this on the fold. So this is my piece cut out on the fold. This is the front piece number 2 is the pattern piece. Now, whichever one you cut is going to be based on the measurements, whether you need to cut the darted front or if you need to cut just the regular one that doesn't have the dart or the FBA. So cut the one that corresponds with your measurements. And then you'll cut a mirror image, just one piece. And then you'll want to cut, and this is the same no matter if you're an FBA or not, or the dart or not. So it's the same on all the different options. So you'll cut this one on the fold, and it looks like this. And then you'll cut one piece out of your lining. You can line yours in whatever you want. I like to use another athletic fabric. You can make sure it's something that feels comfortable next to your skin. If you want to put power mesh or some kind of really firm hold, you can cut that out. I would cut it out of this piece on the fold and it will look exactly like this. And then I would just either you can baste it onto this piece or you can, if you baste it onto this piece, baste it onto the wrong side. So just lay it flat on it and then baste it around the edges. Or you can just lay it flat on it and treat them as one piece without the basting. It's up to you. I am smaller chested and I just don't have the need for power mesh, but on some of the larger sizes, you will find that it gives you more support than just athletic fabric by itself. It'll make it a tighter, firmer fit, but that is what you need if you're doing more intense exercises and don't want as much bounce. Okay, so now that we have these cut out, I'm gonna put my lining to the side for now, and we're going to put this together. So in order to put this together, I marked where my center fold was on all my pieces, just so that whenever I'm putting them together, it's easier. So I'm going to match up the center fold on, well, I said that I did that, but I didn't do it on this one. So I'm going to go mark this real quick. Again, and now I'm going to put these right sides together. Let's see, this is the right side. And I'm going to put a clip right where those center points are to match them up. And then now I'm going to match the edge. So you can see that this is the strap part. This is going to be sewn all along here. And then here's the edge. So the edge is going to have a little dog ear just so that the seam line matches up. So think about, I'll put a clip right where the seam line is. So you want, when you sew this, for it to open up and that edge to be flat. And it's not going to be if you just line this up. If when you're sewing this, if you sew it here, well, that seam line is not matching. So whenever I turn this over, do you see how it's going to look like that? It's not going to go all the way to the edge. So you want to give it a little dog ear to where the seam line is what is matching up on this edge. And you want to do that on the other edge. So I always match my center and then I'll match my edge right here. And then I'll just go in and kind of see how this eases. And I'll put a few clips here. Now, the wonderful thing about sewing with stretch fabrics is that you don't have to be so precise. You can kind of just like ease them to meet each other, and it's not nearly as intense as trying to ease like a woven garment to fit. Okay, I'm going to clip the other side. And you see how this edge, I mean, it's not like perfect, but I'm just going to kind of ease it to where I can get, because once it's sewn and you flip it to where it's just one solid piece, it's going to look nice and flat. It's just when it's turned like this, the curves make it look like it's not going to fit, but it will. Once I get that sewn, it'll look like that. So I'm going to go over to the serger. You want to sew this with a 3/8 inch seam allowance using a stretch stitch. After you sew it, we can top stitch it if you prefer the look of top stitching. Since there's lining, it's not like mandatory. But anyways, let's go sew this.
Okay, so now I have sewn the seam together, and now I'm going to top stitch it. So to top stitch it, I'm going to push the seam down towards the body. Since this area is already narrow, I don't want to make it appear narrower than it already is. So that's the reason I'm top stitching there. You could do your top stitch, you could do a reverse cover stitch here if you want to have the look on the outside of your bra. I don't really want to, so I'm just trying to do one that kind of coordinating thread. You're just trying to follow this curve as best as you can. You should be done constructing the color blocking section on the front. Now we can get our lining, and now we can sew the lining to the front. We are constructing the front of the bra. I have already done the darts on this one. If you're doing the darted version, you'll want to have made sure that you have done your darts on your main as well as on your lining. And now you're going to take your, so this one is just the solid front. There is no color blocking on it. So that means that I cut 2 of the front liner piece. So I just cut 1 out of the lining fabric, and then I cut 1 out of the main fabric. So now you are going to put them right sides together, and we are going to stitch this seam right here. This is the only seam that we're sewing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew it on with my serger using a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to put clear elastic onto the right side, the wrong side of my main fabric. So not on my lining. I'm going to put it on here. If you don't mind your lining possibly sticking out, you can do your clear elastic at the same time as you do your this seam right here. So you can just sew it all at once, so you're not having to go back and do it twice. I prefer to just go and do the seam on my serger and then go back and zigzag in my elastic. But you definitely can, and some people will feed it through their foot, and that is an option that you can do. But I am going to do my serger at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and then I will go back and do the clear elastic. Okay, so I just wanted to show you my seam. This is what it looks like from the right side. You can see that my clear elastic is just barely over that seam edge, and what that's going to do is when I turn the bra out to the right side, that my lining isn't going to poke out. So from the front it's going to look like this, and on the back it's going to look like this. So it kind of makes it, so now we're going to turn it right side out. And you are done with this part of your lining. You can put your cups in. I don't know if you've noticed, but I kind of skipped putting the cups in. I like to wait and put my cups in later on in the process once I've tried it on and I can see where they sit directly where they need to be. You should be done with your front. This is for the single U-back version, and you should have 2 pieces cut out, one that is main and one that is lining. Your main and your lining can be the same, or they can be different, just depending on what you have on hand and what you prefer. So I am going to make these right sides together. So my fabric, this is the right side. So I'm going to put my main on top of my lining, and I am going to sew the Armscye, the back Armscye. So that is going to be this right here. So I'm going to use my serger. You can just use a stretch stitch as well on your regular machine, and sew this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. After we've sewn that, we're going to go back and add clear elastic. When you add your clear elastic, you can start 3/8 inch away from the edge, just so that you don't have the bulky seam allowance right here. It's going to reduce some of the bulk whenever you sew that. But if you accidentally get some in there, that's fine. It's just for purposes of reducing that bulky seam there. Okay, so let's get to sewing now. So we are applying elastic. I'm going to start 3/8 inch away from where my seam allowance would be, or 3/8 inch from the edge. So I don't want to put elastic where my seam allowance would be. If you have a wrong and a right, a main and a liner that are different, you want to make sure that you are putting the elastic on your main fabric side. So like the one that is facing up towards your presser foot is the one that you want to be on the outside, and that'll help so that the liner doesn't show through on the front. Just doing an easy zigzag along here. Mine's set at, you want it anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5 on the width and the length of the stitch. Let's see. So do you see how the elastic is kind of, it's over the edge of the seam? My camera's having a hard time focusing on that because it's so shiny. And that's going to cause it, whenever I turn it to the right side, the wrong side is going to roll to the back. When I say wrong side, I shouldn't use that word. It's actually your lining. So you're applying the elastic to the main, and since it's lapping over the edge slightly, it's causing the liner to roll to the back so that you can't see the liner fabric on the front.
Okay, so let's do the solid racerback option. So that means that you're not layering the back, you're not doing the keyhole, you just want one solid racerback on the back of your bra. And then so you're going to want to have your racerback cut out on the fold, and then you'll want to have the lining of it cut out on the fold. So you would just have this piece, and this is from page 37 and page 41. And when I cut it out, I folded the fabric along the grain line like this, and I cut out both like that. I made a notch, like a little mark where my midpoints are, just to make it easier in lining up. I did that on the top as well as on the bottom. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to do is we're going to take our racerback and we are going to put it right sides together. So take the back piece, your main, and then take your lining. I'm trying to figure out which one is the right side. Sometimes when they're printed, it's harder to tell. So I think this one is. So I'm going to put it right sides together, and then I'm going to sew all along this edge right here with the 3/8 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to take it to my serger and sew the seam. Now that we have sewn, it's probably hard to see on the black, but you can see I've sewn the edges of the racerback, and these are the ones that go around your shoulder blades. Now that we have done that, we are ready to apply some clear elastic. So we're going to go and do this at the sewing machine. If you want to, a lot of people do this, is they put the clear elastic into their serger as they're sewing the seam, just to make it easier. I prefer doing them in 2 steps. But there's no right or wrong on this. I'm not saying that one way is better than the other. It probably saves time doing it this way. It probably saves time if you do it all in 1 step, but I prefer doing it on a 2nd step, because when I do it on a 2nd step, I can apply it to the right side of the bra and it causes the lining to roll to the inside. So that's the reason that I like to do it that way. But if your lining is something you don't mind poking out, then don't even worry about that, and you can just do them together. So I'm going to go to my regular machine and apply this with a zigzag. You don't want to stretch it. You want it to just be like a 1-for-1 application. So even around this curve, you're not wanting it to be stretched. You're just wanting to sew it evenly on both sides onto the right side. Okay. So at this point, you should have your elastic sewn into the seam, and we're just going to turn this back right sides out, and you are done constructing your back. And you can see, since I put the elastic, you can see how it caused the lining to push to the back because of the way that I applied the elastic. You can top stitch at this point if you want to. I don't bother top stitching this seam down, but if it's one you want to lay flat, then you definitely can do that. But once it's stretched over your body, even if it's, you see how it's kind of like a little bunch there, once it stretches over my back, it's going to be nice and tight. The seam will lay flat.
we are working on the layered back version of the Embrace Bra. And on the layered back, you're going to have wanted to cut out 2 of the layered Racerback. Now this one is different than the regular Racerback because this area right here isn't as tall, so that it kind of reduces some of the bulk in the underarm area. So make sure you've printed a different one on that one. And then you'll also want to have cut 2 out of the U-back. Now on the U-back one, it is the same piece, whether you're making the layered or the single. The only difference is this cut line right here. You're going to want to cut with the wider amount for the layered back. Because if you're doing just the U-back, you would finish it with binding. But since we are going to finish this right sides together, then we don't need that extra. We do need this extra seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to start with the U-back portion of the layered back, and I'm going to put them right sides together. I'm going to head over to the sewing machine, and I am going to sew 3 seams on this. You're going to sew your Armscye, so there's 1 and there's 2, and you're also going to sew this U-back. You're not doing this if you're doing just only the U-back. The only time you're doing this is if you're doing the layered back. And then let me also tell you, I accidentally skipped this step so many times and then end up having to like go back, and it's such a nightmare. So do not skip sewing this seam right now. Otherwise you will regret it later. Okay, so we're just gonna sew those with the stretch stitch. After we sew them, we're gonna go back over them and put clear elastic. And I've talked about this several times probably before in this video. You can do the clear elastic at the exact same time that you sew the seam if you would like, but I like to do it with separately. But it's up to you. Whichever method you prefer and feel more confident using is completely fine. Okay, so let's head to the machine. Let's finish just these 3 seams. While you're inserting the clear elastic, make sure that you start and stop 3/8 inch away from the edge. And this is just so that it's not bulky in your seam allowance area. Also, you don't want to pull on it in any way. You want to just keep it nice and flat while you're sewing it. I'm back from sewing my U-back. I just wanted to show you, it's really shiny, so it might not show up, but I put in the clear elastic. I sewed the U portion and then the Armscye. And now I'm going to grab my Racerback piece, and you're going to want to put those right sides together. That's the right side. And I am sewing on this one. I'm only sewing the Armscye area, this right here. You do not want to do this right here. That will be done as part of the binding on, will be your very final step. You'll bind this at the same time you do your front neckline. So leave this alone, and then we're only sewing this right now. And we're going to do the exact same way we did on this part. You're just going to serge it and then go back over it and put the clear elastic into that seam. So this one you can probably see better since I used different thread. I didn't want to change my serger thread. This is what the Racerback looks like sewn, and then you have your U-back. So now we're going to just flip these to the right side. Let me mention, one of the things that I wanted to bring up is on if you wanted to use mesh on your Racerback. I did that on one of my bras that I did in testing, and I really like the way that one turned out. And as how I did it is I just cut 1 piece. So if you were to cut 2 and then have it lined to the mesh, then the mesh isn't going to be like as see-through, and it kind of defeats the purpose of the mesh. So you just want to cut 1 of these, but the one difference that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to trim, or I'm sorry, not, yes. You'll want to trim off 3/8 of an inch off of this seam because you're not going to be sewing that. So I trimmed off 3/8 inch of my seam allowance off of this, and then I went and did binding. So to do the binding, you just cut a 1.5 inch strip. I didn't really calculate it. I just made a strip that was long enough to make it this far on both sides. And then you sew it on like binding. The binding technique will be shown on the very last video. So if you want to just skip ahead and look at that video to see how to do the binding. I also made sure not to stretch it too much through here, just because all it did was make it like really look bad. I don't know why, but I didn't stretch it very much. And I did add some clear elastic in that seam, but that's optional. I don't think, if you're doing binding, I don't think adding clear elastic there is necessarily necessary. Okay, so we're going to be flipping these right side out so we can do the layered aspect of the bra.
Okay, so now if you did not do the keyhole part, if you did not want a keyhole and that's closed, all you're going to do is lay your Racerback on top of your U-back like this, and you will baste your side seams. So take this Racerback and only the main of your U-back, and then baste that little piece together right there. And do that on both sides. You can even just baste along the bottom to hold them together. Also, another thing to think about before you put them together is if you want to do any top stitching, now is the time to do that. If you maybe just wanted to top stitch some of your seams, you can do that. If you're doing the keyhole, you could do binding, but I think it's going to get really bulky because you're going to be binding 4 layers, and then on top of that, the binding layers. So the best way to do this part is to put your Racerback down with the right side of it facing up. So see which side, since this is the same, I'm going to see which one doesn't roll to the front. This is my right side. I'm going to lay that up, and then now I'm going to put my U-back on top of it with the right side facing up too. And we are going to sew them together. So you're going to line them up at this keyhole, get a few clips and clip them here. So both of them are with the main, whatever side you want to be facing out is facing up right now. And there's going to be 4 layers that you're clipping together, just the keyhole. The keyhole, you can also call it the cutout. Okay, so now I'm going to sew here. This, I know it's interesting to see just because I have the same layer as my main and my lining for each one of them. But this would be like if I had used a different lining. This is my main fabric I want facing out on the outside, facing up on my Racerback. And then the same thing on my U-back. I have my main fabric facing up like this. And then I clip the keyhole for all of those layers together. And I'm going to just sew with a stretch stitch using a 3/8 inch seam allowance, only this keyhole part. I'm back from the machine. I sewed just this keyhole part. And now you're going to reach underneath and pull your Racerback to the right side. And now your keyhole is finished, and you have layered your layered back. And now what we're going to do is just baste these layers together. You can also, if you want to top stitch this down, see how mine's kind of like peeking out a little bit there. So if you want to top stitch that down so that your U-back doesn't poke out, you can definitely do that right now. But the main important thing is that you baste this together. So you're going to baste this Racerback portion onto the main of your U-back. So you're going to baste this, and your lining right here can just kind of hang out. And we're going to do this on both sides. On this step, do not baste your bottom together. Not yet, at least. Don't baste your bottom to your lining because we want to sew. Tomorrow we'll be sewing the side seams, and you will need this lining and main for you to be able to separate them to sew your side seams. To do a basting stitch, we're just going to do a long stitch on our sewing machine. So just set your stitch length at the longest that it'll go. Sew along here, but leave that lining of the very bottom layer alone. Okay, this is what your layered back should look like. I top stitched there, and I basted there. See, I don't baste it within the seam allowance. I baste it out here because I want to be able to easily just rip them out whenever I'm done.